Chaos. Chaos refers to the collective forces of the warp. Endless legions of demons, cultists, space marines, and all sorts of nasty monstrosities beyond your imagination. The warp is essentially controlled by the 4 chaos gods, 4 ancient beings who existed since the beginning of the universe and are generally rather unpleasant. First is Khorne, the god of war, who is basically Satan. Have you ever heard the phrase, blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne? If you don't know, that actually originates from 40k, and Khorne is the blood god in reference. He's pretty straightforward. He likes to kill stuff. Tzeentch is like weird Satan, god of change, deceit, and birds. He is like your weird cousin who does magic tricks. And whenever something in the lore doesn't make sense, or you have a plot hole that needs filling, you can just wave it off and be like, it was some Tzeentch bullshit. Nurgle is fat Satan. He's the god of pestilence, death, and decay, and he is smelly. And finally, we have Slaanesh, or horny Satan, god of pleasure, pain, emotions, and excess. And she is basically Pinhead from Hellraiser. Most entities in the warp serve one or all of the chaos gods, some willingly, some not so willingly, and some are basically using them for their power despite not actually liking them. And then there's Perturabo. He hates chaos, but he hangs out in the warp because he hates you even more. Demons. Chaos demons are, they're demons. What more do you want me to say? They are pure chaotic entities who exist only to feed their gods, usually by killing stuff. Each god has their own theme. Khorne demons are aggressive and they super like killing stuff. Tzeentch demons have lots of psychers and they like to pull pranks on people. Nurgle demons are slow and tanky, and they smell like the bathroom at the most ghetto 7-Eleven in Brooklyn. And finally, Slaanesh demons are fast, they hit really hard, and they have exposed genitalia all over the place. Demons are a bit hard to talk about. They don't really have characters. Yes, there are demons with names, but that doesn't make them actual characters. And they don't really have their own stories. They just kind of show up and kill stuff sometimes. They're basically the personality of each respective god made manifest. They can't be killed, only banished back into the warp, where they will be on timeout for a while, depending on how hard they got killed, but eventually they'll be back. I will say, though, they have by far some of the coolest models out there, and that is because a lot of them are just Age of Sigmar models. Sag. Chaos Space Marines, oh boy. Yeah, so remember the Horus Heresy, when half the Space Marine legions turned traitor and joined Chaos? Yeah, they're still around. And most of them have been super chaos corrupted over the last 10,000 years. They now pop in and out of the warp, causing havoc, murdering people, and also trying to kidnap normal Space Marines to turn them into more Chaos Space Marines. The most prominent CSM Legion is called the Black Legion. This was Horus's old legion, who were called the Sons of Horus, but after Horus died, one of his captains named Abaddon was like, "Fuck you, Dad," so he stole his flagship, changed their name to the Black Legion, and resolved to show his bitch dad how to actually destroy a galaxy. He embraced Chaos Undivided, which is to say he serves all 4 Chaos gods. He doesn't actually like them, but he wants to steal their power and use it to crush the Imperium. Now known as Abaddon the Despoiler, he commands a huge force of Chaos Demons and Space Marines, and seeks nothing less than the complete annihilation of every living thing in the galaxy, but especially the Imperium. The Black Legion are basically the Ultramarines of Chaos, the sort of jack of all trades. They're pretty good at everything, can fit most playstyles, and they draw upon the power of all 4 Chaos gods. And they're pretty cool. I can't lie. And now, the part I've been dreading. Space Marine Lightning Round Part 2. God damn it. Emperor's Children. They like to grape people. Yes, you heard me right. I'm not going to say it again. But as the dedicated Slaanesh Legion, they like to torture people and cause as much suffering as possible. I don't like Slaanesh in general, because yes, the endless torture and grape of innocence makes me a bit uncomfortable. It is too gross for me. Their Primarch is Fulgrim, and he is just the worst. On top of embodying all this nasty Slaanesh stuff I already don't like, he's vain, egotistical, and an all-around douchebag, and nobody likes him. Oh, and he's a snake now. Iron Warriors. The Iron Warriors are like the dirty jobs of 40k. It might be messy and unpleasant, but it doesn't matter what the job is, they'll get it done in the most brutally efficient way possible. They love machinery, they enslave demons to do their dirty work, and they're definitely the most pragmatic legion. Their Primarch is Perturabo. He's bitter, egotistical, and all-around douchebag, and he's one of the most beloved Primarchs. He's somehow so unlikable it comes full circle to him being likable again. I think it's because while Fulgrim talks the talk, Perturabo walks the walk. Less obnoxiously loud, and he's incredibly good at what he does. Also, whatever your least favorite Primarch is, there is at least one story of Perturabo giving them a metaphorical swirly. The Iron Warriors are technically Chaos Undivided, but they hate Chaos. They just hate Chaos slightly less than they hate you. Night Lords. They are literal terrorists. They seek to conquer through fear and scare tactics. They have their own warped sense of justice, where if they can conquer a planet by horrifically mutilating a few thousand people and parading their corpses around, this is less bad than a war, because less people will die. Their Primarch is Conrad Kurz, Murder Batman. He is completely insane, can see the future, and let himself be killed by an Imperial assassin out of sheer spite. The Night Lords are also Chaos Undivided, but it's because after the death of their Primarch, they're hardly even a cohesive legion anymore. They're more like roving bands of psycho-terrorists. World Eaters. Hey, if I told you there was a legion called the World Eaters, and their Primarch is named Angron, what would you guess their gimmick is? Did you say being really fucking angry all the time? Yeah, this is one of those times where Games Workshop were really not subtle. They're all frothing psycho berserkers and have even implanted devices in their heads to make them angrier. Angron, their Primarch, is the biggest and angriest of the bunch, and this is where most newcomers don't like the World Eaters. They're too one-note, and Angron, while he has a cool model, is kinda lame. They are also probably my favorite Space Marine Legion. But Kalma, you said the Iron Hands were your favorite. Well, the Iron Hands are my favorite Loyalist chapter, but the World Eaters are my favorite overall. Why? Well, for two reasons. One, I am a simple man. I see a giant winged demon dual-wielding chainsaw axes, and my pants starting to tighten rather uncomfortably. Two, there comes a point where every burgeoning Warhammer fan looks into the history of the World Eaters and realizes, wow, these guys are really sad. I may make a video on the tragic downfall of both Angron and the World Eaters Legion, but for now, just know they are a lot more than they appear at first. Oh, and they worship corn, if that wasn't obvious from the red color scheme and the excessive number of skulls everywhere. The Death Guard. The Death Guard are the chosen of Nurgle. They are very smelly and also stinky. They're slow, they can't die, and just being in the vicinity of these guys is bad news because they spread disease and horror everywhere they go. Their Primarch is Mortarion, one of the more controversial Primarchs. He's kind of a hypocrite sometimes, and had a period of like 10,000 years where he just sat in his doom bunker and was like, yo, Typhus, you go do all the chaos stuff, I'm just gonna chill here. When motivated though, he's incredibly brilliant, even outmaneuvering and beating up on Guilliman in the Plague Wars until Big E decided to cheat. Thousand Sons, our last god-specific legion. The Thousand Sons worship Tzeentch. They're almost all psychers and have this pretty cool Egyptian vibe going on. They like gathering knowledge and exploring, which is weirdly wholesome for a group of demonic super soldiers. Their Primarch is this big red idiot, Magnus, who is an incredibly powerful psyker, and despite what people on Reddit will tell you, he absolutely did things wrong. The Word Bearers are kind of forgotten about, and they get a pretty bad rap because of Lorgar, their Primarch. They themselves are pretty cool though. They look awesome, and they're big into dark rituals, and they're easily the most culty of the legions, if that's your thing. Lorgar, however, their Primarch, is a whiny bitch who accomplishes nothing aside from getting constantly bullied until he has to be saved by one of his big brothers. People say he's like the main bad guy of the setting, and I kinda get it, but he's also spent the last 10,000 years hiding in a tower from Corvus, so forgive me if I don't feel overtly threatened by him. Finally, we have the Alpha Legion. They're all about subterfuge and deception. They actually don't act like Space Marines at all. They don't like fighting, they lie all the time, they run away if outnumbered. They're like the CIA, but in power armor. Their Primarch is complicated. There were actually two of them, identical twins named Alfarius and Omegon, but then Alfarius got killed, but Omegon kind of slipped into his brother's shoes, but also every single Alpha Legion Marine calls themselves Alfarius in an I am Spartacus sort of thing, so you never know who the actual Alfarius is, except that Alfarius is dead, maybe, but it's also been hinted at that it may have been Omegon acting as Alfarius who got killed, which means that Alfarius is pretending to be Omegon, pretending to be Alfarius. And is this confusing yet? If yes, congratulations, Alpha Legion. If no, well, you're a lot smarter than I am. And there, we're done. No more Space Marines. I promise. And that actually wraps up Chaos quite nicely, so we can move on to some motherfucking aliens.
Engage the survivors. Rectify the anomaly of their continued existence.
Eldar. Unfortunately, when talking about Xenos, we kinda gotta start with the Eldar, or the Eldari. Space elves. They're all pretentious assholes who constantly fuck everything up, and then have the nerve to chastise everyone else for not listening to them. I don't like the Eldar, if that wasn't clear, but they are really important to the setting as a whole. The Eldar were the dominant race in the galaxy for like 50 million years preceding the current story. They were so advanced, they had complete control of basically everything, including reality, and they had no problems. No food shortages, no disease, no war, aside from a few minor uprisings from primitive races here and there. They had invented their own separate dimension that they used for travel instead of going into the nasty warp. So how did they lose it? Well, picture this. It's Friday night. Your girlfriend comes over, you get some pizza, have some sex, play some video games. We're imagining here. I know it's hard, but stick with me. Sounds awesome. Perfect Friday night. But now do that every single night for years. You're gonna get bored. You gotta ramp things up a bit. Pizza becomes cake, sex becomes some crazy BDSM stuff, and video games becomes drugs. Now continue this escalation for tens of millions of years, and the entire Eldar civilization had basically become one gigantic cocaine-fueled murder orgy. Now, a fun little quirk about the warp that I haven't mentioned yet is that it kind of projects things that happen in real space into it. It's a bit weird, but basically your emotions and feelings become warp energy. You're happy, you produce happy warp energy. You're angry, you produce angry warp energy. You throw a galaxy-wide murder rave, and the sheer huge amount of emotional energy makes the warp kind of short-circuit a little bit. It gets more violent, more chaotic, one might say, and starts projecting weird stuff into real space. Side note, this is what caused the Age of Strife for humans. Eventually, though, the massive amount of horny murder juice the Eldar were throwing to the warp hit a sort of critical mass, and then pop! Slaanesh was born. Yeah, there were actually only 3 Chaos Gods until the Eldar just had to go and ruin everything. Slaanesh immediately killed about 95% of the Eldar population and ate all of their souls, leaving 2 main groups of survivors. A couple smaller ones as well, but I'm only talking about the 2 main ones here. Craft World Eldar. So a little while before the Eldar reached peak degeneracy, some Eldar looked at the horrifying state their empire had reached and were like, fuck this, we're out of here. So they boarded giant planet-sized spaceships called craft worlds, and they left. They wanted to lead a less degenerate lifestyle. These are Eldar proper, and they're the pretentious ones who most people don't like. The only people who like the Eldar are Eldar fans, and by God will they let you know it. It also doesn't help that along with them being obnoxious in the lore, they seem to more often than probably any other faction be completely broken on the tabletop, so a lot of people also don't like them for that reason. I don't think they're great right now, as of time of writing, but it feels inevitable that they'll be back. The Eldar are very powerful, though. They have crazy, super advanced technology, and they're really warp sensitive, which means they have lots of psychers. And they're constantly being hunted by Slaanesh as they try to finish what they started. The other group of Eldar who survived are different, and I also don't like them, but for different reasons. Remember when I said the Eldar created an alternate dimension for travel, so they don't have to go through the warp? It's called the Webway. And some Eldar decided to live there. And that place, a city called Kamara, was the absolute worst of the degeneracy. When Slaanesh was born, they had a really hard time breaching that dimension to get to the Eldar there. So a sort of unspoken deal was made between the two parties. Slaanesh won't actively hunt and kill them, as long as they continue to feed Slaanesh lots of tasty warp energy, of the horny murder excess variety. These Eldar became known as the Drukari, and by God are they good at what they do. They raid other races for slaves, and then they commit horrible, horrible torture on them so that Slaanesh will leave them alone. Don't feel bad for them though, because while they're technically kind of in servitude to Slaanesh, this is the shit they were already doing that caused Slaanesh in the first place, so they love it, and they would be doing it anyway. And this is why I don't like them. They look really cool, but it's what I said about the Emperor's Children. All of the horrible torture and rape of innocence makes me uncomfortable. Just Slaanesh in general, really, I don't like for that reason. I get 40k is supposed to be grimdark, but it goes too far for me. Like, some of the books and stories go into way more detail than I would ever want. It's why I like Khorne, you know? He's simple. He likes killing, but he doesn't like to draw it out. Time spent torturing is time you could have spent killing more people. Okay, that got a little bit heavy, but with the other out of the way, it's only uphill from here. Tyranids are bugs. Lots of bugs. Lots and lots and lots of bugs. They are the endless hive mind swarm. Basically, StarCraft, they're the Zerg. They look fucking awesome, and they're actually the faction that initially got me interested in 40k. My dad got me StarCraft 2 when I was like 11, and the Zerg were immediately my favorite race. Ooh. You got little bugs, big bugs, ranged bugs, psychic bugs, flying bugs, ship bugs, any task you can think of, there's a bug for that. They evolve super quickly, being able to rapidly adapt to different environments, disease, poison. So, what's their backstory? Excellent question. We don't know. They're not native to our galaxy. All we know is that these massive hive fleets started very recently, in lore, showing up from outside the Milky Way. Even more concerning is that hive fleets have shown up from different places, so we might actually be entirely surrounded. Tyranids have only been around for like a few hundred years in lore, so they're still relatively unknown to the galaxy as a whole, and they're also largely considered the biggest threat to the entire galaxy at the moment. I want to say, I think perhaps the greatest feat Games Workshop have pulled off in the lore is how they've handled the Tyranids. They're exclusively written about from the third person, often in brief, terrifying accounts of like PTSD-riddled survivors. They have this atmosphere of unspeakable Lovecraftian horror about them, and it's really, really cool. The only downside is that while it's fantastic for the setting as a whole, it kind of sucks for Tyranid players because they have no characters, and they have no stories of their own. It's why, while they might be my favorite faction from an aesthetic standpoint, and I love them, I don't collect them, and I don't spend a lot of time thinking about them when they're not on screen. Of note, they're also not really evil, per se. They're basically just animals, they're not motivated by power or greed, and they have no greater goal other than to eat. It's like how a lion isn't evil for eating a gazelle. The problem is that on the galactic food chain, they're the lions, and we are the gazelles. Genestealer cults. Tyranids Part 2, kind of. Genestealer cults, or GSEs, are groups of humans who have been infected by some sort of Tyranid virus, which messes with their brains, makes them worship the Tyranids as gods, and also turns their heads into, well, you get the picture. They basically precede Tyranid invasions, posing as humans and sabotaging planets or systems from within, softening them up before the main fleet arrives. They're pretty cool, but like Tyranids, they don't have a lot of lore of their own. Leagues of Votann. Literally the reason I made this video, besides capitalizing on Space Marine 2 hype, the Leagues of Votann are the newest faction added to 40k, and they are now my favorite faction. For a long time, I kind of went back and forth between Necrons and Guard as my favorite, but as soon as the Votann dropped, it was grudge at first sight. The Leagues are, in a nutshell, really angry space dwarves. They love mining, forging, and beating up elves. They've established big trade federations, which are the titular leagues. They have super crazy advanced technology, because they were actually once humans. Way back in the Dark Age of technology, a group of humans went to colonize the galactic core. Over tens of thousands of years, these humans adapted to the higher gravity of the worlds they settled on, becoming shorter and stockier, and they now refer to themselves as kin. After the Age of Strife, these colonies were largely forgotten about and just kind of assumed to be dead. But this was fine with them, because they prefer to keep to themselves. There was a small group of kin who left and settled elsewhere, who met with the Imperium and were known as squats, and whoa there, watch it with the hard T, man. Uncool. Then they all got eaten by Tyranids. Sucks for them, but the Tyranids then continued to encroach on kin territory, and this is what finally forced the Leagues to truly reveal themselves to the galaxy. Now, you might have a question. If the people themselves are called kin, and the Leagues are trade federation, then what on Holy Terra is a Votann? Glad you asked. A Votann is essentially an ancient supercomputer AI with all the collective knowledge of the old Dark Age of technology. And they were not meant to last forever. After tens of thousands of years of collecting more and more new data and information, the Votann have started to become a bit overtaxed. They run slower, and some of their once very professional AI personalities have started to go a bit loony. The kin have since formed a whole pseudo-religion around the Votan, basically believing them to be gods, or actually more like ancestor spirits, I suppose. But man alive, I love these guys. They're amazing. They don't have a whole lot of lore yet, but what they do have is super cool. They like to chill out with guardsmen, and they really hate the Admech, because if the Admech found out the true nature of the Votan, it would be war. They hate the Eldar. I hate the Eldar. They have antimatter guns and gravity cannons and all sorts of cool weapons. Really, the problem is that there just isn't enough of them yet. As I said, they're the newest faction, just coming out last year, so there aren't any books or games about them yet, and they only have like 16 units on the tabletop, I think. Compare that to the Space Marines, who have like 80. Anyway, I love them. Games Workshop, please give us more Votan stuff. They're so cool. Oh, we're in the home stretch, voice. Just hang on for a little bit longer. 60 million years ago, there was a group of fleshy gray men called the Necrontyr. They all had cancer. 40k is not a happy place. They came from a planet with a strong sun that gave them like a 90% rate of terminal cancer, but despite this, they managed to eventually become a spacefaring civilization and colonize the stars. Their lives were still short and painful though, and the Necrontyr wanted nothing less than immortality. They met this race of super ancient powerful dudes known as the Old Ones, and they were like, hey, Old Ones, you guys sure are super cool. How about sharing some of that immortality juice with your Necrontyr buddies, eh? The Old Ones had a feeling, however, that the Necrons were in fact not their buddies, and refused. They were proven right when the Necrontyr immediately declared war on them. And a question, if I may. How do you think it would go if your local cancer ward all declared war on a race of ancient alien space gods? That's about how well it went for the Necrontyr. They got shunted back to their miserable little corner of space, and they just had to stew in their misery for a while. Eventually, as luck would have it, they encountered a second race of alien gods known as the Catan. The Catan hated the Old Ones and were hilariously evil. They ate stars and souls for sustenance, like it was not subtle. But they came along and offered the Necrontyr a deal. Hey, fight for us against the Old Ones, and we'll give you the immortality you want so bad, wink wink. I do want to quickly point out that this Necrontyr dude named Orican the Diviner, who could literally see the future, was like, oh my god, don't do it. Very bad, very not good. But he was ignored, and the leader of the Necrons, Silent King, agreed to the Catan's deal. The Necrontyr were then chained and dragged into these massive biotransference foundries. Here their flesh was burned away and replaced with metal, and their souls were all eaten by the Catan. Most Necrons functionally died here and were replaced by mindless robots. Only the high-ranking military leaders and politicians kept their consciousness and memories. They were also all implanted with a command module, which made them completely subservient to the Silent King. The Silent King was absolutely horrified by what he had done. But he also had no choice but to fight with the Catan in their war against the Old Ones. The war between the Catan and the Old Ones is known as the War in Heaven. This war lasted 5 million years, involved the creation and genocide of countless species, and was the most destructive thing that has ever happened and ever will happen. It was nuts. In the end, though, the Old Ones lost, and they were all either killed or forced to flee the galaxy. It's a bit ambiguous, but either way, they're gone. The Catan were now the undisputed masters of the galaxy, with their, loyal Necron army by their side. Eventually, the Catan got bored. They started squabbling amongst each other. For too long, squabbling turned to fighting, and fighting turned to war and murder. Soon, the Catan were at full-scale galactic war with each other, and it was here that the Silent King saw an opportunity. With the Catan weakened and disorganized, he led his Necrons in this massive rebellion. Once again, the entire galaxy burned in a ridiculous giant war. This time, though, the Catan lost, and the Necrons came out on top. Awesome. But after this war, the Necrons had a bit of a problem. One of the ways the Old Ones fought wars was by creating new races, helping them along, and hoping they would get strong enough to help them fight. Now obviously it didn't work out for them, but after they disappeared, some of the races they created were still kicking around. Most notably, the Eldar and the Orcs. Except at the time the Orcs were called Krorks, and they were bigger and smarter. These races had advanced really fast and were now knocking at the doors of the Necron Empire. Silent King was a pretty smart dude, though. The Necrons had just come off fighting the two biggest wars in the history of the galaxy, and they just did not have the strength for a third one. So he came up with a plan. He ordered massive stasis chambers to be built inside of thousands of planets, which are now called tomb worlds. When they were ready, he sent all of his Necrons to Betty Bye and set an alarm clock for later. Once they were all asleep, he disabled the command modules, giving them their freedom back, and then he hopped in his spaceship and went and sat in the endless void between galaxies as penance for betraying his people. And that's where he sat for 60 million years. And then some bugs showed up and he was like, oh my god, that's so many bugs. So he rushed back to the Milky Way to wake up his boys, only to be very surprised when a lot of them had already started to wake up. As it turns out, when machines are left running for 60 million years with no maintenance of any sort, no matter how advanced those machines may be, things will go wrong. So the Necrons have started waking up piecemeal all over the place, and it's not going smoothly. Some are broken, some have gone crazy, some have developed a desire to eat flesh, which is a bit weird since they don't have mouths or stomachs, and it's a bit of a disaster. And that's basically where we are today. Necron factions are called dynasties, and there are two major ones and a bunch of smaller ones. The two big ones are led by the Silent King and Imhotep the Stormlord. And I just gotta quickly mention Imhotep because he's a fucking badass. He was a high-ranking Necron tier general, and after biotransference, he was given the ability to control the weather, thus the Stormlord. He was in a tomb world called Mandragora, right? And it was the previous home of the Sautek dynasty, and they started waking up early. The previous Pharaoh died in stasis, so when a bunch of kind of minor lords and nomarchs woke up, they all immediately started fighting each other for control of the planet. The only thing they could agree on was to stop the reawakening of everyone else until they could figure out who was in charge, which they did. This civil war went on for the next 10 years until one of these random lords had a really stupid idea. The great General Imhotep sleeps on this planet. Surely if I wake him up, he will be indebted to me, and thus he will serve me. So that's what he did. Imhotep woke up, took one look around the planet, and was like, what the fuck is going on? He immediately declared himself the new ruler of the Sautek dynasty, and then killed all of the other lords who wouldn't submit to him. He made it illegal to speak out against him, and then set off to start waking up more tomb worlds to expand his dynasty. Imhotep is simultaneously the most brilliant general in the history of the galaxy, and also a massive racist. He's really into the idea that the Necrons are the greatest, and that the universe belongs to them through destiny or whatever. And his plan was going pretty well until the Silent King showed up, and long story short, the Silent King was like, Imhotep, my greatest general, a very buggy threat approaches the galaxy. Place yourself back under my command, and together we shall repel this invasion. And Imhotep was like, fuck off. You fed our souls to some gods, destroyed our civilization with wars, and then you went and cried for 60 million years while we were at it. I absolutely adore the Necrons. They look incredible. As I said, they were like generally my favorite faction before the Votann came out, and they still hold a very special place in my heart. They don't have a lot of books, but the ones they do have are fantastic. The Twice Dead King series is so good, I would put it up against any other 40k books. The Necrons themselves, however, even by 40k standards, their technology is insane. It's basically magic. They can like control time and reality. They're also the only race with proper faster than light travel, which, yes, is ironic because they don't have souls, which means Chaos wouldn't care about them even if they could travel a warp. But they're just 10 out of 10 in terms of design. Seriously, everything about the Necrons is immaculate. And I've now talked about them for way longer than I intended to, but they're just so cool I couldn't help it. Orcs.
Say the line, Bart!
Orcs. Everybody loves orcs. The orcs are big, dumb, strong, and my god, there are so many orcs. It is called the Green Tide for a reason. The orcs love two things, food and crumpin'. What's crumpin'? Fighting. Why do they call it that? I don't know. Why don't you go ask one of them and see how it goes for you? The orcs make no sense at all. They all speak with ridiculous British chimney sweep accents that are like if you hired Michael Caine to voice Kratos, and they have the power of imagination. Really, it's just a thing, where if a group of orcs believe something to be true, it will be. take a giant novelty aluminum can, punch some holes out the front of it to see, and strap some fucking V8 engines to the side, and boom, spaceship. Does that make any sense? No. But the orcs believe it'll fly, so it's gonna fly. They believe in two gods named Gork and Mork, and at the end of the day, life's just a big old party for the orcs. As long as there's good food and a good fight, they are happy. And they're also led by this psycho strike gigachad, Gazkul, who is an orc in a giant mech suit. The orcs basically provide some much needed comic relief to a universe that can get really dark at time, and I swear you'll never meet a shitty orc player. Like, the faction's player base has just a fantastic reputation, and for good reason. I've never met a bad guy who plays orcs. They're all just good, wholesome people who like to fuck around and have some good games. God bless orc players. Gork and Mork bless orc players. The Tau Empire. Alrighty, last one. Jesus Christ. Story time. A few thousand years ago, an Imperium research vessel was out scouting various planets for probably nefarious reasons when they came across one with a race of these blue fish-looking dudes. They were a very primitive race, though, basically cavemen shaking sticks and rocks at the Imperial flagged ships flying overhead. While they were a race of filthy heretical xenos, they weren't a threat, and the Imperium had bigger shit going on elsewhere, so they basically marked them down on the will genocide later list and left. Then this big warp storm rolled in and cut off that entire sector of space for like 5,000 years. When the storm finally subsided, the Imperium were rather caught off guard, because these fishmen had all united under one banner, the Tau Empire, and they had invented giant Gundam suits, faster than light travel, and most importantly, communism. There are a lot of memes about the Tau, and a lot of people don't like them, which I think is a bit ridiculous because they're super cool. The first main criticism is that they don't fit the aesthetic of 40k, but like, what the fuck even is the aesthetic of 40k? You've got slick future space elves, gothic religious fanaticism, and fucking British space orcs. But Gundam suits are too far. I think it's a dumb argument. The Tau look cool as hell. The other reason people hate the Tau is interesting, and here's a fun little tip for you. If you know any 40k veterans, especially the ones who subscribe to the Tau don't belong bullshit, you can actually send them into a full PTSD flashback with one word: Triptide. This comes from the tabletop. See this big mech suit with a railgun arm? So that's called a Riptide, and it's basically a giant walking artillery piece covered with guns. It's supposed to be a glass cannon sort of thing, where it does big damage from long range, but dies quickly if you shoot back, right? Sounds balanced enough. The problem was that you couldn't shoot it back. These little drones, these are shield drones, and I don't know the exact mechanics of the time, but basically, if you shot at the Riptide, the drone would just zoom in front of it and tank the hit. So Triptide was a specific strategy where your whole army would be like 3 Riptides, that's the name, Triptide, triple Riptide, and like a million shield drones. And I think it was like the best strategy in the game for a big chunk of 7th edition, I think. I only got into 40k after this, right at the end of 8th, but listening to people talk about this is like listening to your granddad talk about his time in the Korean War. It is crazy how much this traumatized people. The Tau also have some weird lore stuff. When they came out, they were the good guys. Like, they actually weren't evil, which I really like from a narrative perspective, that they're this, very young race just reaching relevancy, so they're naive and not as fucked up as the other races, but people bitched about it, so they had to make the Tau more evil. Enter the Ethereals, these dudes with the weird forehead vaginas. They're the highest circle of government, and they basically subtly mind control the other Tau into doing their bidding, which is nefarious, I guess. They basically want to bring everyone into their empire and convert them to believing in the greater good, which is their religion. And yeah, they actually don't want to genocide everyone else, which is crazy, right? Roses are red, the Tau are blue. Preach the greater good, or we'll fucking kill you. So that is a brief overview of the lore of Warhammer 40,000. This is by far the longest and biggest video I've ever made. So I would really appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, comment, share, all the YouTube stuff. I try not to ask for that usually. I think it's a bit cringe, but with how much effort I've put into these videos, it would mean a lot. Also, fuck you, Games Workshop. This script is 24 pages long, and 13 of them are the Imperium. And that's with me having, mega cut the Space Marine chapters. Anyway, not the point. The point is, thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel because I will be making more videos soon. I may do some more 40k lore videos if this does well, you know, kind of deeper dives on some particular factions. But also I like to make videos about video games that I like. So, you know, that's pretty cool, and also watch those, please. Okay, thanks, bye!